we're watching a massive shift unfold, quietly, suddenly, and with huge consequences.
It actually has a queen-size bed, which is hard to believe.
For Gus Francis, this is home.
Millions of older Americans are packing up their lives, selling off what they can, and moving into R-Vees because they're out of options. Rent increases are hitting record highs. Retirement incomes aren't keeping up. And the safety nets people trusted for decades, they're cracking wide open. This isn't the R-Vee lifestyle you see in glossy ads. This is survival mode. Families are being torn apart, dealers are overwhelmed, and the used R-Vee market is twisting into something we've never seen before. And the scariest part? The system that caused this is about to hit everyone else next. The retirement floor gives way. For decades, retirement planning carried a sense of certainty. People expected that after working for most of their adult lives, the numbers would support a stable future. Savings, modest returns, and predictable expenses formed a clear path forward. But over the last 15 years, something fundamental shifted. Prices rose faster than anyone anticipated. Everyday essentials consumed larger shares of monthly budgets, and the old promise of a steady retirement faded. The realization struck slowly at first. Then, all at once, the retirement math that worked for earlier generations no longer matched the world unfolding around them. This moment of recognition hit hard. What used to feel like a dependable financial foundation now felt more like sand slipping underfoot. Trips to the grocery store revealed totals that climbed month after month. Utility bills carried charges that pushed beyond what anyone considered reasonable. Insurance premiums rose with every renewal. Even minor services, repairs, appointments, routine errands began draining accounts quicker than expected. People noticed their purchasing power shrinking while their fixed income stood still. The balance between stability and strain tipped toward uncertainty with each passing year. It was not just about the numbers. It was the shock of watching a lifetime of planning collide with a world that no longer followed the old rules. And when that shock settled in, a question surfaced with unwelcome clarity. If the foundation could no longer hold, what pressure would strike next? The first and most painful answer arrived through a cost nearly everyone must confront: housing. Rent surges hit hardest. Housing markets across states with large older populations experienced a surge unlike anything recorded in prior cycles. Median rents climbed year after year, outpacing the income of anyone relying on fixed monthly payments. In states such as Florida, Texas, Arizona, and the Carolinas, the increases were not mild upticks. They were sharp jumps, driven by supply shortages, competition from younger renters, and a wave of investor-owned properties pushing prices upward. A one-bedroom apartment in many of these regions soared far beyond levels a stable monthly income could reasonably track. Renewal. Notices reflected the shift with brutal clarity. Some tenants saw increases that forced immediate decisions. Others discovered that even older, modest apartments had been pulled into the same surge. Searching for alternatives offered little relief. The same rising tide had washed over every nearby community. Years of predictable housing costs gave way to a landscape where prices moved faster than anyone's ability to adjust. It became clear that fixed incomes were no match for a market driven by aggressive growth and limited supply. For many, this marked the turning point. Housing, the expense once considered manageable with careful planning, now consumed more than budgets could bear. Traditional renting no longer aligned with financial reality, and the pressure to find another path intensified with every new rent cycle. And just as housing costs surged beyond reach, another crucial support pillar revealed its own cracks. If this is already revealing more than the headlines ever do, make sure to like the video and hit subscribe so you never miss the next update. And if something in your area looks similar, leave a comment so others can compare their situation honestly. Pension shortfalls. Pensions that had been treated as secure anchors for retirement entered a period of deep strain. Funding ratios fell as obligations grew and returns lagged. Actuarial tables shifted with longer life expectancy, placing additional pressure on plans already running thin. Reports documented underfunded liabilities and warnings that some pension systems would struggle to meet long-term commitments. When payouts were frozen or adjusted downward, the impact on individuals was immediate. What was once a dependable monthly stream became a shrinking contribution to an expanding expense list. The numbers told a clear story. Some pension plans operated below the levels considered financially healthy. Others reduced projected benefits or changed formulas to protect remaining assets. Private sector pensions faced closures, transfers, or restructuring. Every change, regardless of the explanation, resulted in less income available to those who depended on it. The loss could be small on paper, but significant in practice, especially when combined with rising everyday costs. This created a widening gap between what retirees expected and what the system could deliver. The shortfall was not symbolic. It was practical, hitting planning, budgeting, and long-term stability. The support that many counted on no longer matched the demands of modern living, leaving people searching for solutions outside the traditional framework. And when both housing costs and income stability shifted at the same time, many began looking toward an option they never expected to consider. Motorhomes become the emergency escape hatch. When rents rose beyond reach and expected income no longer covered the basics, people searched for alternatives that could offer even temporary breathing room. The T search led many to a conclusion they never imagined. Living in motorhomes provided the least damaging financial compromise. This decision did not begin as a lifestyle preference. It began as a calculation. When the choice was between exhausting savings on unaffordable housing or finding shelter outside the traditional system, motorhomes emerged as the only option that allowed some measure of control. The realization often landed abruptly. A renewal notice arrived with a number that no fixed income could sustain. A pension adjustment reduced a carefully balanced budget. Savings declined faster than expected. Step by step, the traditional housing model failed to offer a viable path forward. People began comparing their dwindling resources to their rising costs, and saw only one way to slow the financial pressure. Moving into a motorhome became less about adventure and more about survival. For many, the emotional weight of this choice lingered. Leaving a home, downsizing belongings, and preparing for a mobile life brought a mixture of relief and disbelief. But the financial logic overruled hesitation. Traditional shelter had become unaffordable, and motorhomes allowed people to delay financial collapse, while keeping some control over their situation. What started as a reluctant idea became a rapid migration, reshaping how thousands, then millions, responded to a financial system that no longer worked for them. And this migration is only the beginning of the larger national shift that follows. Older buyers flooding motorhome lots. Dealers across the country noticed a distinct change in who walked onto their lots over the past several years. Auction reports from the last 2 seasons showed a noticeable rise in buyers aged well past midlife entering the market for motorhomes, shifting the age distribution that manufacturers had relied on for decades. These buyers were not looking for weekend travel rigs or summer vacation units. They were studying year models, mileage histories, and ownership records with the seriousness of someone evaluating a long-term shelter option. The average age of a motorhome shopper increased significantly, and dealerships tracked this shift through internal sales logs and customer surveys that revealed a marked rise in older adults trading traditional housing for wheels. The auction data said even more. Units that previously moved from younger outdoor enthusiasts to similarly aged hobbyists were now changing hands from older sellers directly to older buyers. Consignment yards reported higher turnover of motorhomes built 10 to 15 years ago, and the buyer pool consistently skewed toward those seeking an immediate housing alternative rather than a recreational upgrade. This change had nothing to do with travel trends, and everything to do with necessity entering the motorhome market. In a system built on predictable buyer demographics, this shift altered inventory demand and dealer strategy almost overnight. As the age profile changed, a deeper financial question followed. How do the numbers compare when shelter sits on wheels instead of a foundation? Motorhome living. When the cost breakdown is placed side by side, the financial structure of motorhome living creates a very different equation than traditional housing. A typical apartment rent absorbs a fixed monthly payment that rises with each renewal cycle, but motorhome site fees at long-term parks often fall well below those thresholds. The comparison involves more than the monthly site charge. Fuel expenses add a variable component tied directly to miles traveled, while insurance for motorhomes introduces another recurring cost shaped by vehicle age and region. Maintenance becomes a predictable obligation, especially for units over 10 years old, and depreciation steadily reduces the value of the rig with each passing season. Even with these factors included, the overall math sometimes tilts in favor of motorhome living, especially for those leaving rapidly rising rent environments. A stationary setup in a long-term park cuts fuel use substantially, allowing the cost structure to stabilize around site fees, insurance premiums, routine mechanical work, and occasional repairs. Depreciation remains unavoidable, but it behaves predictably, unlike rent spikes driven by market conditions. When all components are added together, many found that the combined monthly outflow still landed below what they faced in traditional housing. The equation varies by region, vehicle age, and travel frequency, but the comparison is straightforward for anyone running the numbers carefully. The financial picture offers one layer of truth, but the shift to mobility brings another consequence that is far less predictable: isolation and support loss. Life on the road removes people from the networks that quietly supported their routines for years. Those networks include neighbors who checked in without being asked, family members who lived close enough to help with chores or appointments, and familiar local contacts who served as fallback options during unexpected events. Once someone becomes mobile, those informal structures disappear, and the absence carries its own financial burden. Without reliable support nearby, even small disruptions, like a flat tire, a minor medical issue, or a delay in receiving medications, turn into larger, more expensive problems. Emergency costs climb quickly when there is no consistent help to stabilize a situation. A person who once relied on a nearby friend for a ride may now need to pay for transportation. Someone accustomed to calling a familiar mechanic may find themselves searching for assistance in an unfamiliar town, often at higher rates. The lack of continuity increases the likelihood of missed appointments, rushed decisions, and service gaps that ultimately raise expenses. Medical routines, prescription schedules, and basic safety measures become harder to maintain, and the yin financial impact compounds over time. Mobility offers flexibility, but it removes the safety net that helped prevent small issues from becoming urgent ones. With support systems changed and costs dispersed differently, the very foundation of retirement planning begins to shift into a new structure: retirement identity, rewritten. When housing becomes variable instead of fixed, the entire framework of retirement budgeting changes. The traditional model assumed a stable monthly cost base, predictable bills, and a long-term residence that allowed for consistent planning. Once someone transitions into motorhome living, that model no longer applies. Expenses become fluid, location-dependent, and tied to decisions made month by month rather than year by year. The shift demands a different budgeting mindset, one that expects fluctuations rather than stability, and prepares for unexpected expenses rather than assuming predictable cycles. This new structure pushes people to build flexible survival budgets rather than fixed retirement plans. They begin setting aside funds for uncertain future needs, calculating expenses based not on averages but on ranges, and preparing for contingencies that rarely appeared in traditional budgeting. Fuel variations, temporary site increases, seasonal costs, and mechanical repairs all shape this new financial identity. Rather than a steady outflow that follows a fixed schedule, costs rise and fall like a tide, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment. It creates a different kind of financial life, one that depends on adaptability rather than predictability. This shift does not represent a luxury or preference, but an adaptation to the realities of a mobile lifestyle. It demands a new approach to financial planning that abandons the older assumption of a stable retirement environment. The transformation is not philosophical, it is mathematical. And as this new financial identity spreads across the country, the systems built for a stationary population begin to show where they can no longer keep up. Housing supply breakdown. The national housing supply entered a gridlock long before the pressure became public. Construction slowed when material costs climbed, labor shortages increased, and developers shifted toward premium units rather than attainable ones. Zoning restrictions in many regions continued to block multi-unit developments, reducing the number of homes available to those who needed them most. As inventories tightened, the remaining options rose in price, favoring renters with higher incomes and sidelining older adults who relied on stable, predictable payments. The shortage created a competitive environment where multiple applicants pursued the same property, and landlords prioritized tenants who could absorb increases without negotiation. For those living on fixed monthly income, the shrinking inventory created an uneven playing field. Even older units that once served as affordable choices were absorbed into a market chasing maximum yield. Investors purchased properties that had previously offered moderate rents and repositioned them at higher price points. This left older renters facing fewer choices and escalating competition. Without the ability to stretch budgets, they were frequently the first displaced when demand surged. The supply chain breakdown became more than a national statistic. It became a direct force pushing people out of stable housing, with construction unable to catch up and zoning unable to adapt. The squeeze tightened month after month, and as housing became harder to secure, another structure meant to offer stability revealed a different kind of strain. If you want the truth before it becomes tomorrow's news, take a second to subscribe. These shifts are moving faster than most people realize, and staying informed now could save you from making a costly decision later. Healthcare disruption for mobile seniors. Losing consistent medical care brings financial consequences that are rarely visible at first glance. People who rely on familiar doctors, established routines, and predictable appointment schedules suddenly find themselves navigating new clinics in unfamiliar areas. Each move interrupts continuity. Test results need to be transferred, medical histories must be re-explained, and new providers often require repeat evaluations that add extra costs. When someone relocates frequently, these repeated procedures accumulate quickly, turning manageable expenses into larger, unpredictable bills. The lack of a consistent provider also increases the chances of missing early signals of health issues, leading to more expensive treatment down the line. Travel-based gaps complicate the equation further. Reaching a clinic may require driving long distances, arranging temporary transportation, or waiting for openings in overburdened rural systems. Missed appointments can trigger additional charges, and urgent care visits often replace regular checkups, bringing higher fees. Medication management becomes another challenge when pharmacies differ from town to town, and refill timing becomes inconsistent. These disruptions create a financial penalty that grows with each relocation, and routine care becomes a series of disconnected encounters rather than a steady, reliable system. When the health structure fractures, costs rise quickly and unpredictably. While medical routines falter under mobility, another institutional pillar struggles with its own set of numbers that no longer match the real world. Social Security and safety net failure. Cost of living adjustments tied to Social Security aim to offset inflation, but the formula rarely reflects the actual rise in prices for essentials. When real inflation outpaces these adjustments, the checks fall short of what daily life demands. Over the last decade, increases in necessities such as food, utilities, transportation, and insurance exceeded the annual adjustment rate, leaving a widening gap between income and expenses. Each year, the difference compounds, and the purchasing power of a fixed monthly payout shrinks. For many depending on this income, the shortfall is no longer marginal, it is decisive. Other safety net programs designed to supplement income face similar limitations. Resources tied to federal and state budgets often fail to expand at the pace required to match rising living costs. Eligibility thresholds do not adjust quickly, and benefit amounts lag behind inflationary pressures. The result is a system that provides less effective support each year, even when nominal amounts appear unchanged. Retirement plans built around the expectation of stable Social Security income now face a mismatch between projected needs and actual payouts. As expenses rise, the safety net stretches thinner, leaving individuals responsible for covering gaps the system can no longer fill. And as income loses ground and expenses grow, those who shift to mobile living encounter another barrier hidden within the legal framework governing where they park. Zero protections for motorhome living. Motorhome parks sit in a regulatory category that lacks the protections commonly associated with traditional rentals. People occupying spaces in these parks do not receive the same tenant rights available to apartment renters. There are no standardized eviction rules, no rent caps, and no long-term security guarantees. Park owners can change policies with little notice, revise site fees, or decline renewals without going through formal procedures required in conventional housing. This absence of regulation leaves residents exposed to sudden displacement and financial uncertainty that cannot be appealed through ordinary housing channels. Stability becomes difficult when the legal structure does not define clear obligations or protections. A long-term resident may receive notice that a park is being repurposed, upgraded, or sold, giving limited time to relocate. Fee increases may be introduced without the negotiation options available to traditional tenants. Disputes over utility access, parking rules, or maintenance responsibilities often fall outside the scope of typical housing laws, forcing residents to navigate issues without an established framework. The result is a living arrangement governed more by park policy than by legal rights. Without defined protections, every change initiated by ownership carries potential financial impact, and residents must adapt without the security of formal tenant safeguards. And with legal protections missing and support structures weakening, the shift toward mobile living begins to reshape more than individual budgets. It begins to alter the country itself. The mobile retirement majority. As millions of people shift from fixed housing to motorhomes, national spending patterns begin to rearrange themselves in ways that were not predicted by traditional economic models. A population that once contributed to stable, localized economies now redirects its spending across a constantly changing map. Money that previously supported specific neighborhoods, service providers, and local retailers becomes dispersed across fuel stations, motorhome parks, and temporary service stops. This movement alters demand for everything from groceries to insurance, creating a patchwork of microeconomies that rise and fall based on migration routes. The pattern is not seasonal. It follows the financial pressures, shaping each decision to stay or move. Housing markets feel this disruption directly. When large numbers leave fixed residences, local demand decreases, but not in a uniform way. Some regions experience sudden inventory openings, while others see continued shortages because people cluster near affordable motorhome sites rather than conventional homes. Spending behavior also changes, shifting from long-term commitments to short-term transactions. People who once signed year-long leases now move between month-to-month costs tied to mobility. This creates instability for regional markets trying to predict demand. The result is a national pattern built on motion rather than permanence. And while the population shifts from static housing to mobile shelter, industries built around predictable customer bases start adjusting their strategies in response. Market shockwaves. Manufacturers of motorhomes adjusted quickly when they recognized the surge in older buyers using their rigs as primary shelter rather than occasional travel units. Design priorities shifted toward features that support continuous occupancy rather than short-term recreation. Builders expanded production of models, emphasizing storage, insulation, and long-term functionality. At the same time, developers of traditional housing analyzed the departure of older residents and began exploring alternative construction types, such as smaller modular homes aimed at those who might otherwise turn to motorhomes. These shifts ripple through supply chains, influencing material demand and labor distribution. Local economies respond in their own ways. Towns located along major travel corridors invest in extended stay sites to attract spending, while areas losing long-term residents attempt to reposition themselves to fill financial gaps. Labor markets evolve as mechanics specializing in motorhome maintenance become increasingly essential, and service providers adapt to a customer base that does not stay in one location long enough for conventional business models. The combination of mobile residents and adjusting industries creates a new economic map where flexibility becomes central to long-term planning. Static assumptions about residency and spending no longer hold, and businesses recalibrate to meet the needs of a population that lives on the move. With industries shifting and spending patterns changing, the impact on local governments becomes unavoidable and far more difficult to absorb. Vanishing tax. Bases. When residents sell their homes, give up leases, and transition into motorhome living, municipalities lose the property taxes and local spending that once funded essential services. Communities built on predictable tax streams begin to feel immediate strain as revenue shortages disrupt budgets for public safety, infrastructure maintenance, and community programs. The disappearance of fixed home retirees removes not only predictable contributions, but also the daily economic activity that supported small businesses. The loss spreads outward, affecting restaurants, clinics, and local service providers who relied on stable, year-round customers. As the tax base shrinks, towns face difficult decisions. Some cut services, delay repairs, or close community facilities. Others raise local taxes on the remaining residents, widening the financial gap between those who stay and those who leave. Businesses that once thrived on steady foot traffic now operate in unpredictable cycles tied to seasonal movement, rather than consistent demand. The financial health of a town becomes tied to migration patterns it cannot control. Without a stable population anchoring the economy, even small disruptions create larger consequences for local budgets. Municipalities try to adapt, but the pattern of spending dispersing across multiple regions leaves them competing for attention and revenue. And as communities grapple with financial strain, individuals watching these shifts must consider what comes next for their own planning and protection. What this means for your money. Changes unfolding across the country signal a period where traditional assumptions about retirement, housing, and financial stability no longer apply. Anyone preparing for the next stage of life must watch emerging patterns that dictate where affordability strengthens or weakens. Timing becomes essential, especially as motorhome park fees, insurance rates, and regional cost structures move in response to the shifting population. Monitoring which states maintain stable expenses and which regions introduce new charges can help prevent unexpected budget stress. The key is staying alert to early signals before they turn into financial pressure points. Protective planning now requires a layered approach, watching tax policies, developer decisions, and the availability of long-term motorhome sites for early signs of rising costs. Fixed assumptions no longer work, and those who adjust before the next shift avoid the harshest pressure. Staying flexible, tracking cost trends, and recognizing emerging patterns helps preserve financial stability. As these changes accelerate, each decision influences both personal budgets and the country's broader financial direction. That's where things stand, and it's only getting worse. Now tell me in the comments, are you seeing this in your area? Rents rising, RV lots filling up? Hit like if this opened your eyes, and subscribe so you don't miss the next update.